The pain came before the memory. Sergeant Cale Reyes opened his eyes to a cracked cockpit window and a sky the color of rust. Smoke curled from the dashboard in front of him. His ears rang with a high, thin whine that would not stop. For a long moment he could not remember his own name, only that his chest hurt when he breathed and that something heavy was pressing down on his legs. He pushed the twisted metal off himself and forced the escape pod's hatch open with his shoulder. It groaned and gave way, and cold alien air rushed in, thick with the smell of burnt wiring and wet earth. Outside, the wreckage of his ship lay scattered across a valley of broken red stone. Fires still burned in a dozen places. Far above, through gaps in the smoke, he could see streaks of light. Ships, still fighting, still dying, in the atmosphere he had fallen from. The battle wasn't over. He had just fallen out of it. He remembered fragments, an ambush. His squadron cut in half in the first 90 seconds. An order over the comms, screamed rather than spoken, to pull back to the flagship. Then nothing. Then this. Cale checked his suit's display. Life support. Failing. Comms. Dead. Rations. Gone. Lost somewhere in the crash. He was alone on an unlisted planet, behind enemy lines with no ship, no team, and no way to call for help. He almost didn't hear the sound behind him. It was small, a scrape of stone, a held breath. But 11 years in the Terran Expeditionary Fleet had trained his body to notice small things before his mind caught up. He spun, sidearm raised, finger already tightening on the trigger. A Thurnai lay pinned beneath a fallen support beam 20 feet away. Not a soldier. He could tell that much even through the haze of smoke. No armor plating, no weapon in reach, just a thin survival suit torn open at the shoulder, dark blood soaking through. She, the shape of her was female, close enough to human that the word came naturally to his mind, stared back at him with wide, pale eyes. Not pleading, watching, waiting to see what kind of man he was. Every instruction Cale had ever been given told him what to do next. Threnai were the enemy. They had been the enemy for 6 years, ever since first contact turned to first blood over a mining colony nobody back home could even name. Command was clear. No contact, no mercy, no exceptions. Report and eliminate. He kept the gun raised for 3 long seconds. Then he lowered it. "Don't move," he said, more to himself than to her, and crossed the wreckage to kneel by the beam, pinning her down. She flinched when he got close, and he saw her hand twitch toward a fallen tool at her side. Not a weapon, he realized. Some kind of scanner. Before she stopped herself, breathing hard, watching his face, for the moment he would decide to kill her instead. "I'm not going to hurt you," Kyle said. He didn't know if she understood him. He braced his shoulder against the beam and heaved. It didn't move. He tried again, boots slipping on loose stone, and on the third attempt it shifted just enough for her to drag herself free, gasping, her injured arm curled against her chest. Up close, she looked younger than he'd expected, or maybe that was just the fear in her face. A translator bead glinted at her collarbone, standard Threnai field gear, the kind their scouts wore, not their soldiers. Her satchel had spilled open in the fall, and he caught a glimpse of data crystals, a stylus, notebooks with handwriting that wasn't military shorthand. "You're not a fighter," he said slowly. She looked at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, the translator bead rendered her words in a flat, mechanical voice, half a second behind her mouth. "No," she said. "I record. I watch. I am not meant to be found by soldiers." Her eyes moved to the rank markings still visible on his torn uniform. "Especially not yours." Cale almost laughed. Of all the things to survive a crash landing for, a philosophical argument with the enemy about who was allowed to shoot who. He tore a strip of fabric from his own sleeve and before he could talk himself out of it, pressed it against the wound on her shoulder. "Hold this," he said. "Tight." She hesitated, then did as he said, watching him the entire time like he might be lying, like this could still be the moment he turned on her. He understood the look. He'd have looked the same way 6 years ago before all of this. Before the war had worn the edges off everything he used to believe about right and wrong. "Why?" she asked. Because you're not shooting at me, Kyle said. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the part he could say out loud. For a few minutes, there was almost quiet between them, broken only by the distant thunder of the battle still raging in the sky and the crackle of dying fires around the wreck. Cale used the lull to strip what supplies he could from the ruined pod. A medkit, a coil of rope, a half-charged power cell, while the Threnai woman sat with her back against a slab of broken stone, watching him work with a mixture of caution and something that might have been curiosity. You have a name? He asked, mostly to fill the silence, mostly because the alternative was thinking too hard about what he'd just done. Vesa, she said. Cale. She repeated it under her breath like she was testing the shape of it. Then her head snapped up, eyes fixed on the sky beyond the smoke, and every muscle in her body went rigid. Kyle heard it a heartbeat later, the deep, familiar drone of Terran dropcraft engines descending fast, cutting through the cloud cover with the kind of precision that meant a trained recovery team, not a rescue. Relief hit him first, instinctive and immediate. His people, his side. Rescue. Then he saw the formation the ships were flying, and the relief curdled into something colder. They weren't circling to land near the wreck. They were spreading out around the entire valley, sealing it, the exact pattern he'd trained for himself, back in advanced tactics. Not a rescue pattern, a containment pattern. Cale. Vesa's voice was low, urgent, the translator bead struggling to keep pace with how fast she was speaking. Those markings, that formation, I have seen it before. On my world, before they burned it. Cale's blood went cold. He grabbed the scope from his ruined pod's wreckage and trained it on the lead ship as it broke from formation and began its descent, engines flaring, kicking up a storm of ash and grit. Through the lens, he could just make out the unit insignia stenciled on its hull. An insignia he knew personally, one he had served under for 2 tours. Colonel Dre's personal strike team, not search and rescue. Cleanup. His comm unit, dead for the last hour, suddenly crackled weakly to life on an emergency frequency. One line, one message, looping on repeat in a voice he recognized immediately. All units converge on crash site. Survivors are to be confirmed and eliminated. Repeat, no survivors. This is not a rescue operation. Cale stared at the dying comm unit in his hand as the words sank in, as the drop ships descended lower, as the ground began to shake beneath his boots. They weren't here to save him. They were here to make sure no one ever knew he'd survived at all. The ground shook harder as the dropships touched down, and Cale made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed a day earlier. He grabbed Vesa's good arm and pulled her away from the wreck, away from his own people, into the smoke. Wait, where? She gasped, stumbling over broken stone. They're not here for me, Kyle said, his voice flat and fast. They're here to make sure nobody who saw what happened up there ever talks about it. That includes you. That includes me now, apparently. They ran. Behind them, he heard the metallic clank of boots hitting rock, the hard bark of orders, a dog team of drones lifting off with a whine that set his teeth on edge. Kyle knew that sound. He'd called in that exact search pattern himself more than once, hunting down enemy stragglers who thought a crash meant a chance to hide. He'd never once considered what it would feel like to be the one hiding. Vesa led them, half carrying her injured arm, toward a formation of shattered stone pillars rising out of the valley floor like broken teeth. Up close, Cale saw they weren't natural rock at all. They were the bones of a building, scorched black, walls collapsed inward, the unmistakable geometry of Threnai architecture even in ruin. What is this place? He asked, dropping into cover behind a fallen column as a drone screamed low overhead. An outpost, Vesa said. Her voice had lost some of its fear, replaced now with something harder, grief maybe, or anger held very carefully in check. My outpost. I've been assigned here for 2 years, cataloging what remained after your fleet came through. Came through, Cale repeated. You mean attacked. I mean came through, she said again, and there was an edge to it now. There was no battle here, Sergeant. No return fire, no warning given. One night the sky opened, and by morning there was nothing left standing taller than your knee. I have the sensor logs. I have cataloged every building that used to be here, every person who used to live here. She looked at him, steady despite the fear still shaking through her hands. It was not a military target. It was a research settlement. Children lived here. Kyle wanted to argue. 6 years of war had taught him exactly what to say to a claim like that. Thranai propaganda, staged evidence, the enemy always finding new ways to make Earth look like the villain of a war it hadn't started. He opened his mouth to say some version of it. Then he remembered the recovery order looping on his dead comm unit. Confirmed and eliminated. No survivors. Not a rescue operation. He closed his mouth. Vesa led him deeper into the ruin, down a half-collapsed stairwell into an underground archive room that had somehow survived intact, shielded by the layers of rubble above it. Inside, rows of data crystals sat undisturbed in their racks, glowing faint blue in the dark, untouched by whatever fire had taken the surface. She moved through them with the practiced ease of someone who had spent 2 years learning every inch of this room, pulling one crystal free and pressing it into a battered reader. "You want proof," she said. "I will show you proof." The reader flickered to life, casting pale light across her face. Sensor data scrolled past. Dates, coordinates, ship signatures. And Cale's stomach tightened as he recognized the format instantly. Terran military encoding. Not stolen, not faked, genuine. "This is a fleet logistics record," he said slowly. "Where did you get this?" "Recovered from the wreckage of one of your own ships after the attack," Vesa said. "A supply vessel, shot down by our defense grid before it could retreat. Its logs survived the crash better than its crew did." Cale scanned the data, and the deeper he read, the colder he felt. Cargo manifests, deployment schedules, a weapons platform designation he didn't recognize, and a date stamp that made no sense at all. "This can't be right," he muttered. "This log is dated 4 years before first contact." "Yes," Vesa said quietly. "That is the part that took me the longest to understand, too." Cale stared at the numbers, running the calculation twice in his head, hoping he'd made a mistake. He hadn't. According to every history briefing he'd ever sat through, humanity's first encounter with the Thranai had happened 6 years ago, at a mining colony called Kessler's Rift, when an unarmed Thranai survey team had allegedly opened fire on Terran miners without warning. That single event had started the war. He had believed it his entire adult life. He had killed for it. But the manifest in front of him described Terran military hardware in Thranai space 4 years before that supposedly first encounter had ever happened. "This is impossible," he said. "There's no way we had assets out here before first contact. We didn't even know your species existed." "Or," Vesa said carefully, watching his face the way she had back at the crash site, still gauging exactly how far she could push him, "someone did know. Someone who decided your people were not ready to hear it yet." Cale's mind raced through every briefing, every classified mission he'd never questioned, every strange gap in the official history that he'd simply accepted because questioning it wasn't part of the job. He thought of Colonel Dre, a man he had trusted with his life on 2 separate tours, now leading a strike team with orders to erase survivors instead of rescue them. He didn't get the chance to think it through. A red light on Vesa's scanner blinked once, then twice, then began pulsing steadily. She went rigid, snatching it up, eyes darting to the ceiling. "Movement," she whispered. "Above us. Close." Kyle killed the reader's light and drew his sidearm, listening. For a moment there was nothing but the distant hum of drones sweeping the surface ruins. Then he heard it, the unmistakable scrape of boots on rubble directly overhead, followed by a voice giving orders in clipped professional Terran military cadence. "Thermal's picking up 2 signatures below grade. Command wants confirmation before we move in." Cale's pulse hammered. 2 signatures. They'd found the archive. "We can't stay here," he breathed. Vesa was already moving, sweeping crystals into her satchel with quick, practiced hands, her earlier caution burned away by pure urgency. "There is a maintenance tunnel," she said, "beneath the east wall. It should still be sealed from the surface, if they have not mapped it yet." "Should be," Kyle repeated grimly, following her toward a low archway half buried in debris. "That's not exactly reassuring." Above them, the scrape of boots grew louder, more numerous, converging on the stairwell they'd come down. A voice barked a countdown. Kale grabbed the edge of the archway and hauled at the rubble blocking it, throwing his shoulder into it exactly as he had at the fallen beam, pinning Vesa hours before, feeling the same desperate strength surge through his arms. The rubble gave way, just as the first flashlight beam swept down the stairwell behind them, and gunfire erupted into the archive room they had just abandoned. Not warning shots, not calls to surrender, but a full, immediate kill volley tearing through the space where they had been standing seconds earlier. Kale shoved Vesa through the gap into the darkness of the tunnel beyond and dove after her, and the last thing he heard before the rubble sealed shut behind them was Colonel Dre's voice, calm and cold and utterly certain, cutting through the gunfire on the comm. "Belay confirmation. Reyes is a hostile now. Shoot to kill on sight. No exceptions." The tunnel was pitch black and barely wide enough for Kyle's shoulders, and somewhere behind them, muffled through several feet of collapsed stone, he could still hear his own name being spoken as an order to kill. Hostile. Shoot on sight. No exceptions. 6 years of service, 2 campaign medals, a dead father who'd been fleet before him, and it had all come down to this: crawling through a stranger's ruined home in the dark, on the run from the very people he had once trusted with his life. "Keep moving," Vesa whispered ahead of him, her voice tight with pain. She was favoring her injured arm badly now, and Kale could hear the strain in every breath she took, but she didn't slow down. This tunnel connects to the old irrigation system. If it has not collapsed further in, it will take us beneath the blast radius. And if it has collapsed further in, then we will have a very short conversation about it, she said, and despite everything, Kale almost laughed. They crawled for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 20 minutes, through narrow passages that occasionally forced them onto their stomachs, dragging themselves forward through dust and standing water. Kale's mind kept circling back to the manifest data, the impossible date, Dre's voice ordering his execution without a flicker of hesitation. Somewhere above them, drones were still sweeping the ruins, their engines a distant droning threat that never quite faded. Eventually, the tunnel widened into a larger chamber, and Vesa stopped so abruptly that Kale nearly collided with her. He raised his sidearm on instinct before he registered what he was looking at. The chamber was lit by strings of low, warm emergency lighting, strung along the walls by hand. Beyond the entrance, a wide underground space opened up, and it was full of people. Threnai, dozens of them, more than dozens, huddled in makeshift shelters built from salvaged wreckage. Children clung to the legs of adults. An elderly Threnai sat near a heater unit, wrapping a blanket around a coughing infant. Every face turned toward the tunnel entrance at once, and every face went rigid with fear the instant they saw Kyle. Vesa. An older Threnai male stepped forward from the crowd, his voice low and dangerous, a crude but functional weapon already raised and leveled at Kale's chest. "Explain this. Now." "He saved me, Elder Coram," Vesa said quickly, stepping between Kale and the weapon without hesitation. "He pulled me from the wreckage. He is being hunted by his own people, the same as us. He is Terran," Coram said, as if that settled everything. And around the chamber, Kale saw other weapons rising, other faces hardening into something between grief and rage. He understood the look immediately, because he'd worn it himself, 6 years of war deep. These were people who had lost everything to soldiers who looked exactly like him. "I'm not going to lie to you," Kyle said carefully, keeping his hands visible, his own weapon lowered to the ground at his feet. "I've killed Threnai. I did it because I believed it was the right thing to do, because I believed the war started with your people, not mine. I don't believe that anymore." "Convenient timing," Coram said, "for a man with a gun to your back." "Coram." Vesa's voice cracked like a whip through the tense silence, and the old man's eyes flicked to her, surprised by the force of it. I have spent 2 years cataloging what your fleet did to this outpost. I have read every log, every casualty record, every name we lost. I know exactly what his people are capable of." She turned, meeting Cale's eyes directly. "And I watched him choose to save my life instead of ending it, when every order he has ever been given told him to do the opposite. That has to mean something." The chamber held its breath. Kyle could feel dozens of eyes on him, weighing him, and for the first time since the crash, he understood, really understood, that his life was no longer his to defend with words alone. It belonged to whatever these people decided he deserved. Coram lowered his weapon slowly, though the suspicion in his eyes didn't fade. "One mistake," he said, "and I will finish what your fleet started 6 years ago. Am I understood?" "Understood," Kyle said. Over the following hour, as Vessa's wound was properly treated by an elderly medic, and Cale sat apart from the others, watched by wary eyes, he began to see the Enclave for what it truly was, not a military outpost, not a hidden base, but a refugee shelter. Families who had lost homes, parents who had lost children, an entire community built out of salvage and grief beneath the ruins of what had once been a research settlement. A little girl, no older than 6, stared at him from behind her mother's legs with wide, frightened eyes, and something in Cale's chest twisted painfully at the sight. He thought about every mission briefing that had described the Threenai as an enemy, without faces, without families, without anything worth understanding. He thought about how easy it had been to believe that, when he'd never once had to sit in a room full of the people that belief was built on top of. Vessa found him there, her arm freshly bandaged, and sat beside him without asking permission. "You did not have to defend me back there," Kyle said quietly. "I did," she said. "You saved my life. That is not a debt I take lightly." She studied him for a moment. "You are troubled by something more than Coram's threats." Kyle hesitated, then told her about the little girl, about 6 years of certainty crumbling in the space of a single afternoon, about the strange, sick feeling of realizing the war he'd fought so hard to believe in might have been built on a lie from the very beginning. "The manifest," he said finally. "If it's real, if Terran assets really were out here before first contact, then someone back home has known the truth this entire time. Someone let this war happen anyway." "Worse than that," Vessa said quietly. "Someone may have made it happen." Before Cale could ask what she meant, a low tremor ran through the chamber floor, rattling the strung emergency lights and sending a ripple of fear through the huddled families. Coram was on his feet instantly, shouting orders in rapid Threenai, and the calm domestic scene shattered into controlled panic. Parents grabbing children, the elderly being helped toward a rear exit, weapons being distributed among the able-bodied. "They found the entrance," Vessa said, her face going pale. Cale was already moving, adrenaline flooding back into his limbs, when the tunnel behind them exploded inward in a shower of stone and dust. Through the smoke and falling debris, armored figures moved with brutal precision, weapons raised, and at the center of them, illuminated by the harsh beam of a tactical light, stood a face Cale knew better than almost any other in the entire fleet. Colonel Dre stepped through the wreckage of the tunnel entrance, expression utterly calm, his weapon already leveled directly at Cale's chest. "Hello, Sergeant," Dre said, his voice carrying easily over the panicked chaos of the chamber. "You've made this a great deal more complicated than it needed to be." For a long moment, nobody in the chamber moved. Cale stared down the barrel of Colonel Dre's weapon and felt something strange settle over him. Not fear, though there was plenty of that too, but a kind of grim clarity. 6 armored soldiers stood behind Dre, weapons trained on the huddled families throughout the chamber, and Cale understood with total certainty that every single one of them would fire the instant they were given the order, without hesitation, without question. He had trained beside men like this. He had been a man like this a week ago. "Colonel," Cale said, keeping his voice level, "stand your team down. These are civilians." "These are Threenai," Dre said, as if the 2 words meant the same thing. "And you, Sergeant, are officially a deserter, and unofficially a very large problem. He tilted his head slightly, studying Kale with something that might have been genuine disappointment. I trained you better than this. You trained me to follow orders, Kale said. Not to execute unarmed families in a hole in the ground. I trained you to protect Earth, Dre snapped, and for the first time a flicker of real anger cracked through his composure. Do you have any idea what's at stake here? What I've done to keep this species united, keep it fighting for something bigger than itself? For 6 straight years? I've seen the manifest, Kyle said quietly. The one with a date 4 years before first contact. I know we were out here before the war started, Colonel. I know Kessler's rift wasn't the beginning of anything. Something shifted behind Dre's eyes. Not surprise, Kale realized with a sick jolt, but resignation. The look of a man whose secret had finally caught up with him exactly as he'd always known it eventually would. You don't understand what you're holding, Dre said, lowering his voice, almost gentle now, the way he used to speak during late-night briefings when Kale was young and eager, and certain the world made sense. Earth was dying before this war, Kale. Fractured. A dozen factions on the brink of civil war over dwindling resources, over old grudges nobody even remembered starting. We found the Threnai 4 years before official contact, yes. We could have opened peaceful relations, we chose not to. You chose war instead, Kyle said, disgust rising in his throat. I chose survival, Dre said, and there was no apology in his voice at all. A common enemy is the only thing that has ever truly united humanity, Sergeant. History proves it again and again. Give Earth a war it could believe in, and every faction, every old grievance, falls in line behind a single flag. 6 years of unity. 6 years without a single civil conflict on Terran soil. That is not nothing. Tell that to her, Kale said, jerking his head toward Vesa, who stood frozen beside him, her face pale with a horror that went beyond fear now, into something closer to grief. Tell that to the little girl over there who used to have a home. Tell that to every person in this chamber whose family died so you could keep Earth from fighting itself. I don't expect you to understand the calculus, Dre said. I need you to understand the consequence. This information cannot leave this chamber. If it reaches the wrong ears in Terran or Threnai, the fragile peace this war has bought us collapses overnight. Billions of lives, Kale, set against a handful in this room. I have made peace with that math. You will too, or you will not leave here at all. Kale's grip tightened on his weapon, still lowered at his side, every muscle coiled. I won't let you kill them. Then I'm sorry, Dre said, and there was, for just a moment, something that might have been real regret in his voice. You were the best soldier I ever trained. He raised his weapon a fraction of an inch. The smallest possible motion, the kind of thing only another soldier would recognize as the beginning of a killing shot. And Kyle moved first, throwing himself sideways as he brought his own weapon up and fired. The chamber erupted into chaos. Gunfire tore through the underground space, muzzle flashes strobing against the walls, screams rising from the huddled families as Coram's people scattered for cover, dragging children behind salvaged barricades. Kyle rolled behind an overturned supply crate as return fire chewed through the metal above his head, his ears ringing, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Vesa, he shouted, twisting to find her, and his blood went cold when he saw her still standing near the tunnel entrance, exposed, frozen not by fear, but by the sight of one of Dre's soldiers swinging a weapon toward Kale's unprotected flank. Kale down! She screamed and threw herself forward. The shot that would have taken Kale through the chest instead caught Vesa across the shoulder and side as she shoved him clear, and she went down hard against the stone floor, blood spreading fast beneath her. For one endless second, the entire world narrowed to the sound of her gasping, the sight of her hand pressed uselessly against the wound, the horrible stillness in her eyes. Something in Kale broke and reformed all at once, colder and harder than it had ever been before. He came up firing, no longer thinking in terms of tactics or survival, only in terms of the 6 feet of ground between him and the soldier who had shot her. 2 shots, precise and merciless, and the soldier went down. Kale didn't stop to check if he was dead. He was already moving, dragging Vesa behind the nearest cover, pressing his hand hard against her wound, while gunfire continued to tear through the chamber around them. "Stay with me," he said, voice cracking despite himself. "Stay with me, Vesa, come on." "The tunnel," she gasped, barely audible over the chaos. "East wall. Leads to the surface, beyond their perimeter." Across the chamber, through the smoke and gunfire, Cale caught sight of Dre reloading, his expression no longer calm at all but furious. Betrayed, a man watching his own protege choose an enemy over him. Their eyes met for one final freezing second. "There's no going back from this, Cale," Dre bellowed over the gunfire. "You understand that? The second you fired on me, you ended your own life. Command will hunt you across the entire quadrant." "Then I guess I'm not going back," Cale shouted. And with Coram's people laying down covering fire from the barricades, he hauled Vesa up into his arms and ran for the east tunnel, her blood soaking through his uniform, the chamber collapsing into chaos and smoke behind him, the sound of Dre's voice still echoing after him, promising an ending Cale had no intention of letting arrive. Not like this. Not with her dying in his arms. Not with everything he'd just learned buried along with them. He burst out of the tunnel into the alien night, the ruined outpost burning behind him, the stars above utterly indifferent to the war unfolding beneath them, and kept running, carrying Vesa deeper into the wilderness beyond Dre's perimeter, into territory no satellite, no drone, no chain of command could reach. There was no way back now, only forward, into the unknown, with the only person left who might tell him the whole truth slowly bleeding out in his arms. Vesa's breathing had gone shallow and ragged by the time Cale found shelter. A narrow overhang of rock at the edge of a dry riverbed, far enough from the burning outpost that the glow of it had faded to a dull orange smudge on the horizon behind them. He laid her down as gently as he could and tore open the med kit he'd salvaged from his own wrecked pod, hands shaking as he assessed the damage. The shot had caught her low on the side, beneath the ribs, and the bleeding wasn't slowing the way he needed it to. He'd seen wounds like this before on soldiers, on friends. He knew, with the flat certainty of experience, that she needed more than a field kit and stubbornness to survive the night. He was going to give her both anyway. "Stay awake," he said, packing the wound as tightly as he dared, using every scrap of training he had. "Vesa, look at me, stay awake." "I am trying," she murmured, her voice thin, the translator bead struggling to keep pace with her fading strength. "You are not very reassuring for a soldier." "Yeah, well." Cale tied off the bandage and pressed his palm hard against it. "Nobody ever accused me of a good bedside manner." She managed something that might have been a laugh, and it turned into a wince, and Cale felt his chest tighten with a fear that had nothing to do with Dre or the war or anything except the very simple, very human terror of watching someone slip away in front of him. Through the long hours that followed, he did not sleep. He kept the wound packed, kept her talking when she could manage it, kept watch on the darkness beyond their shelter for any sign that Dre's team had picked up their trail. Twice he heard drones pass overhead in the distance, engines droning low and mechanical, and both times he pulled Vesa deeper into the shadow of the overhang, one hand pressed over her mouth, his own heart hammering until the sound faded. By the second day, her fever had broken, and by the third she could sit up on her own, pale and weak but alive, watching Cale with an expression he couldn't quite name. "You could have left me," she said quietly, as he checked her bandages for the dozenth time. "Once I was too weak to walk. Once I became a liability. Your people would have." "I'm not really my people anymore, in case you hadn't noticed," Cale said. But he understood what she was really asking. "I don't leave people behind, Vesa. Doesn't matter what species they are. Doesn't matter what it costs me. That's not a rule command gave me, that's just who I am." She studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind her pale eyes. "That is not what we were taught to expect," she said. "From humans." "Yeah," Cale said grimly. "I've been figuring out lately that a lot of what everybody's been taught might be wrong." On the fourth day they heard voices in the wilderness, Threnai voices low and cautious moving through the rocks toward their shelter. Cale's hand went to his weapon on instinct, but Vesa caught his wrist. "Wait," she said. "I know that voice." It was Coram, along with a dozen survivors from the Enclave, weapons drawn but lowered the instant they saw Vesa alive and breathing. The old man's face, when he looked at Kyle, had changed since the chamber. The suspicion was still there, buried deep, but something else had joined it. "You carried her 3 days through open territory," Coram said, not quite a question. "Kept the drones off her trail, kept her alive with field supplies and nothing else." He glanced at the careful, precise bandaging on Vesa's side, the mark of someone who had not slept, who had not once considered abandoning the wounded weight slowing him down. "Why?" "Because that's what you do," Kyle said simply, "when someone matters to you." Coram was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something Kale hadn't expected at all. He extended a hand in the Threnai gesture of respect Kale had seen once before, back in the Enclave, offered between elders. "Then perhaps," Coram said slowly, "I have been fighting the wrong idea of your species for 6 years." Word spread quickly after that, through whatever quiet channels the scattered Threnai resistance used to communicate. Not official channels, not military ones, but the kind built on trust between people who had all lost something to the same war. Kyle began to notice it in small ways. Old warriors who eyed him warily at first, softening, offering him food, showing him hidden paths through the wilderness without being asked. A species that had spent 6 years being told humans were monsters was quietly, cautiously, revising the theory, one small act of stubborn loyalty at a time. It was Vesa, stronger now, who finally sat him down on the 6th night and told him what she'd been holding back. "There is more in the archive than the manifest," she said. "I did not show you everything, because I did not know yet if I could trust you completely." She met his eyes, steady, despite the weight of what she was about to say. "The outpost was not destroyed randomly, Kyle. It was destroyed because of what we had discovered, a communication we intercepted from deep within your command structure, a planning document referencing something called Directive Ashfall." "Ashfall," Kale repeated. The name meant nothing to him, and that itself felt wrong. He'd held a high enough clearance once to have heard whispers of most black operations in the sector. "A purge," Vesa said quietly. "Coordinated strikes against every remaining Threnai settlement across 3 systems. Not military targets, Kale. All of them. Time to launch within days according to the fragment we recovered." Her voice shook just slightly. Dre did not come to that outpost to silence one witness. He came to erase the last evidence of a genocide before it happened. Kyle sat in silence for a long moment, the full shape of it settling over him like a physical weight. 6 years of war, built on a lie he'd believed with his whole heart. A manifest that proved humanity had started the conflict deliberately. And now, an operation that would end it. Not with peace, but with annihilation. Time to strike before anyone outside a small circle of command ever learned the truth. "How many days?" he asked quietly. "Until Ashfall launches." Vesa's expression was answer enough before she even spoke the number. 4, she said. "According to the last intercept I managed to decode before the outpost fell. 4 days, Kale. And the only proof capable of stopping it is sitting in this satchel, on data crystals recovered from a research post your own command has already tried to erase once." Kyle looked down at the worn satchel between them, then up at the dozen faces gathered around their small fire. Coram, the other survivors, Vesa, all of them watching him with the particular fragile hope of people who had learned the hard way not to trust it easily. "Then we're not running anymore," he said. "We're going to stop it." Coram's eyes narrowed. "That is Terran military hardware you would need to break through. Terran command structures, Terran secrecy protocols built over 6 years specifically to prevent exactly what you are describing." "I know," Kyle said, "which is why I need someone on the inside." He thought of every face he'd served with, every soldier who might still believe in the war they'd been sold, and one name rose above the rest. Not a friend exactly, but someone he trusted with his life more than once. "There's a signals officer on the flagship, Ensign Reyna Okafor. If anyone still stationed inside command has a conscience left, it's her. And if she has already been told you are a deserter, a traitor to be shot on sight? Vesa asked quietly. Kale's jaw tightened. Then I guess we'll find out exactly what kind of person she really is, he said. Same as I found out about you. Far above them, unseen in the darkness, a Terran communications satellite passed silently overhead, carrying, though none of them yet knew it, the very first fragile thread of a signal that would either save two species or doom them both, depending entirely on whether one soldier still believed in something worth risking everything for. 4 days was not enough time, and Kale knew it the moment he laid eyes on the relay station. It sat at the edge of Threnai space, a squat gray structure bristling with antenna arrays, the last choke point through which every Terran communication in the sector had to pass before reaching the wider fleet. Getting inside would be difficult. Getting a message out before Dre's people found and silenced them would be nearly impossible. Doing it in under 3 days, with a scattered handful of Threnai defectors and one very frightened signals officer, was the kind of plan that got soldiers killed. Kale was doing it anyway. Ensign Reyna Okafor met them 2 kilometers out from the station in the ruins of an old comms tower, her face pale and her hands trembling as she recognized Kale beneath the grime and days of exhaustion. You're supposed to be dead, she said. Command flagged you 3 days ago. Traitor. Shoot on sight. I thought... She stopped, glancing past him at Vesa and the small group of Threnai survivors watching her with open suspicion. I thought it had to be a mistake. It's not, Kyle said. I need your help, Reyna. Not for me. For everyone. He told her everything. The manifest. The 4-year gap before first contact. Dre's confession in the Enclave chamber. Directive Ashfall counting down toward a coordinated purge of every remaining Threnai settlement in 3 systems. He watched her face change as he spoke. Disbelief giving way to horror. Horror giving way to the particular quiet fury of someone realizing the flag they'd served under had lied to them their entire career. If this is true, she said slowly, and if we broadcast it, we won't just be exposing Dre, Kyle said. We'll be exposing command. The whole chain, all the way up. There's no controlling how the fleet reacts to that. There's no controlling how they react if we do nothing either, Reyna said, steel entering her voice for the first time. Ashfall goes forward in 3 days no matter what we choose. At least this way, somebody gets the choice to stop it. She looked at Vesa, at Coram, at the tired, wary faces of people who had lost everything to a war built on secrets. What do you need from me? The plan, when it finally came together, was brutally simple and desperately fragile. Reyna still held active clearance on the relay station's outer systems, enough to get them through the first 2 security checkpoints if her credentials hadn't already been flagged. From there, they would need to reach the station's primary broadcast array and override its standard encryption, pushing Vesa's recovered data out across every open Terran channel in the sector simultaneously, not just to command, where it could be buried, but to every ship, every crew, every soldier still fighting a war they believed was righteous. Once we start the broadcast, Reyna warned, there's no stopping it partway through. It commits to every channel or none. We do this, we can't take it back. Good, Kale said. I'm done with half measures. They moved on the station under cover of the station's own maintenance shift change. Coram's people creating a diversion at the eastern loading dock while Kyle, Vesa, and Reyna slipped through a service corridor toward the communications core. For nearly 20 minutes it worked. Reyna's credentials held, the corridors stayed clear, and Kale allowed himself the smallest flicker of hope that they might actually pull this off without bloodshed. Then the alarms began, and Colonel Dre's voice crackled over the station's internal comms, calm and merciless as ever. Sergeant Reyes, I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake twice. A pause, heavy with something almost like grief. Lock down the communications core. Full lethal authorization on all intruders. The last stretch to the broadcast array became a running fight through narrow corridors, Dre's security teams closing in from 2 directions at once. Vesa, still recovering, fought harder than Kale had ever seen her, covering their retreat with a scavenged weapon and a fury that had been 6 years in the making. Reyna took a graze across her arm, ducking through a bulkhead, and kept moving without a word of complaint, driven by something that had crystallized in her the moment she'd heard the truth about Ashfall. They reached the communications core with barely 90 seconds before the corridor behind them was breached. "Do it," Kale said as Reyna's hands flew across the console, fighting through encryption layers that hadn't been designed to be broken in under a minute. "Reyna, now? I'm trying," she snapped, sweat beading on her forehead. "This isn't exactly standard procedure." The core's blast door shuddered under impact from the far side. Kale positioned himself between it and the others, weapon raised, knowing with grim certainty that he could buy them seconds, not minutes. The door blew inward, and Colonel Dre stepped through the smoke, flanked by 2 soldiers, his weapon already trained on Kale's chest. The same position, the same certainty as the chamber beneath the ruined outpost. "It's over, Kale," Dre said quietly. "Stand down. I don't want to do this." "Then don't," Kale said. "Reyna's seconds from broadcasting the truth to the whole fleet, Colonel. You can shoot me. You can't shoot every ship in the sector." Something flickered across Dre's face. Not doubt exactly, but the first crack in 6 years of absolute certainty. "You have no idea what you're about to unleash," he said. "Chaos, mutiny, the unity this war built gone overnight." "Maybe," Kale said. "Or maybe people finally get to decide for themselves what they're willing to fight for instead of being told a lie and calling it duty." He held Dre's eyes, steady despite the weapon aimed at his chest. "You taught me that a soldier's job is to protect people who can't protect themselves. I'm still following that order, Colonel. I just finally understand who it was supposed to apply to." Behind them, Reyna's voice cracked with triumph. "Broadcast is live. It's going out. All channels, full sector." Dre's weapon wavered, and in that single unguarded instant, Kale understood that the man in front of him was not a monster, not truly, just a soldier who had made an impossible choice 6 years ago, and had spent every day since convincing himself it had been the right one. That understanding didn't make Kale lower his own weapon, but it made him hesitate to fire first. He didn't have to. Dre's own comm crackled to life, flooded suddenly with 100 overlapping voices. Ship captains, crew, soldiers across the sector, all reacting in real time to a truth 6 years in the making. Confusion, outrage, disbelief turning slowly, ship by ship, into something that sounded unmistakably like mutiny. "Confirm authenticity of Directive Ashfall. Repeat, does anyone have confirmation?" Standing down. "I am not participating in this. Repeat, all crew stand down." Colonel Dre, respond. "Is this broadcast accurate? Does command have a statement?" Dre lowered his weapon slowly, and for the first time since Kale had known him, the man looked utterly, completely lost. A general without an army. A believer whose faith had just been broadcast to the very people it depended on. "You've broken it," Dre said quietly. 6 years of unity. Gone. In 90 seconds. "No," Kyle said. "We've given people the chance to choose something real instead." "That's not broken, Colonel. That's honest. For the first time in 6 years." Dre didn't fight when Coram's people arrived moments later, breathless from the diversion, weapons raised. He simply stood, weapon lowered, staring at the console, still broadcasting confirmation after confirmation of ships across the sector standing down, refusing Ashfall's launch order, demanding answers from a command structure that suddenly had none to give. In the days that followed, the war did not end cleanly. Wars built on 6 years of blood rarely do. But it changed shape entirely. Ashfall was formally cancelled within 48 hours, buried under the weight of a fleet that would no longer follow it blindly. Command fractured, investigations began, and the long, difficult work of unwinding 6 years of lies started in earnest. With Kale's testimony, and Reyna's, and the recovered data from a ruined research outpost at the center of it all. Kale stood at the edge of the relay station's observation deck weeks later, watching Terran and Threnai vessels hold position together in the same stretch of space for the first time in 6 years. Not fighting, not fleeing, simply watching each other with the wary, fragile beginning of something that might eventually become trust. Fessa found him there, fully healed now, Her satchel of recovered records finally handed over to people who intended to use them for truth instead of erasure. Karam tells me the surviving families from the Enclave will be resettled, she said quietly, standing beside him. Under joint protection, Terran and Threnai. That's good, Kale said. He also tells me, she added, that he no longer believes all humans are the same as the ones who burned my outpost. She glanced at him. It seems you have become something of an unlikely example, Sergeant. Kale huffed a tired laugh. I'm not a soldier anymore, Vesa. Not really. Not for a cause I can still stand behind anyway. No, she agreed. But you are still exactly the man who dragged me out from under a beam and refused to let go, even when every order you had ever been given told you to. She held his gaze, something warm and certain in her pale eyes. That is not something you lose, along with a uniform. Kale looked out at the ships holding steady in the dark, at a war finally, cautiously beginning to end, and understood at last why the story mattered. Not because humanity had won some grand victory, not because of weapons or tactics or strength. It mattered because one person had refused to look away from a truth that was inconvenient, had chosen a stranger's life over a lie he'd been raised to believe, and had discovered in the end that this was the thing worth respecting all along. There was no way back to the man he had been before the crash. He didn't want one anymore. Standing beside Vesa, watching two fleets learn to breathe the same silence instead of trading fire, Kale finally let himself believe that some things, once broken honestly enough, could still be built into something better than they had ever been before.